All right, I don't want to wait too long here. We are still waiting on Arjun from Connext, but I think we can just kind of get started with introductions. So thanks everyone for being here today for this FuruRadio or X space on solvers, on intents, on this kind of interesting new structure that we've seen some protocols use. So we want to just go over basically in this what are solvers, how do they fit into the picture, and kind of what are intents. So that's how it's going to start, is discussing the idea of intent and then how solvers are built on top of that. Oh, Arjun is here now. Welcome. Great. So we have everyone here. So first off, we'll just start with introductions. So introduce yourself, and then basically what protocol you're working for, and then we can go into information or introducing your protocol itself. So I can start here. So my name is Belazar. I work for the Furu Combo team. And yeah, that's it. So I can pass it off to Tharaka. So I'll just introduce everyone first, and then you can kind of introduce yourself a bit more. So Tharaka's here from the Kontos team. We have Andrea from CowSwap, and then we have Arjun from Connext. So feel free to just jump in and introduce a little bit more about yourself. Maybe we can start with Tharaka. And thank you very much for taking the time to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction and having us over. So my name is Tharaka. I am the CM here at Kontos. And for everyone that's just hearing about Kontos for the first time, we're basically a ZK-powered omni-chain infrastructure platform or protocol that's built by Zachary Labs. And it's basically we're trying to set a new standard in digital asset management and omni-chain trading. And I'll get into it a little bit more, especially with our intent-centric approach and how we manage everything across different platforms. But yeah, really excited to join this conversation on solvers and excited to learn from all of our amazing speakers today. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tharaka. We'll pass it over to Andrea.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea. I'm a senior research economist at CowSwap, where my role is primarily to study and propose improvement and monitor the solver competition, so the mechanism that runs over which CowSwap is then built. CowSwap, I guess most listeners are familiar. CowSwap was doing intent before intent was actually, people came up with this word. And primarily this is intent, like swap intents, and recently expanded this idea of intent to include AMMs. So there were liquidity providers also kind of benefit for the intent or infrastructure that we created.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea, and welcome. And then we'll pass it off to Arjun.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I'm Arjun. I'm one of the founders of Connext. Connext is one of the first intent-based bridges. We also started building using this design pattern prior to the term intents being created back in like 2020, 2021. And Connext basically has had this philosophy that there needs to be kind of like a separation between the underlying mechanism that you're using to like secure messages that go between chains, and that should be as like secure as possible, even if it's expensive, versus the thing that actually guarantees the user experience. You can almost think of this as like the layer 2 of cross-chain. And we think that layer 2 is intents, because you could basically just have some service provider come and like deliver assets to the user or do the thing that the user wants to do on another chain instantly, like in seconds, and then get settled later on by the protocol. Really excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thank you, Arjun. And yeah, super excited to have some OGs here that were kind of around before the idea of intents came out. It was kind of interesting going through in my mind and assigning that new terminology basically to something that I've been using already for such a long time. So Awesome. So I think everyone kind of introduced their protocol a little bit. I'll maybe touch base on what FuruCombo has been doing in terms of intents and how we've kind of gotten involved in that. So we recently started a CowSwap solver. So that's kind of how we got into this market. And the idea behind that is to kind of add, for us, it's adding an additional revenue stream, but also providing additional functionality for users using this new system. So we've tied this into, or will tie this into, our protocol link system, which is a public API and a lending SDK. So that allows developers to also take advantage of that system and tie that into their protocols using our API, and also applies kind of additional composability with the features and functions that FuruCombo provides today. So yeah, really excited for that. Maybe we can kind of get into just kind of what are intents in general, for people that don't understand or are new to kind of the idea and intent-centric protocols, because it's a kind of a different way of thinking or doing things that hasn't been done. So I'll maybe leave it to the experts of that to go over that. So feel free to kind of jump in and discuss or just let everyone know what are intents and then what are intent-centric protocols.
I can start. So there's a lot of explainers around intents out there. Unfortunately, a lot of the explainers are not super helpful because they're very, very kind of like technical, and they express kind of like in a high level term that an intent is basically any kind of desire that a user has to do something, and then you can have you can have like a system behind the scenes that then goes and like fulfills that desire. And there's a lot of complexities to how that can be done, but a lot of people talk about like, oh, well, you can use like, you can have people like express their desire to do something in natural language and then have like an AI model go and fill it. That's all really, really helpful. But I think like the most, useful thing for a lot of folks I've found is just to ground it in a real example and not even a crypto example. So an example of an intent-based system that we've all used is Uber, or whatever other ride-sharing app you've used. With Uber, you as a user are basically expressing that you want to go from where you are currently to some destination that you've put in. And the implicit expectation is that that's happening as like quickly and cheaply as possible. When you broadcast that intent, Uber goes and contacts all of the drivers in your area. And basically has like a protocol for how they do this. They're trying to, as I mentioned, optimize for like time and speed, and also optimize for like not optimize for cases where drivers are like potentially picking up multiple rides at the same time. And basically the Uber mechanism, you can almost think of it like a protocol, matches you with a driver based on their proximity to you. That's an intent. You have expressed your desire to go somewhere. You've expressed an intent. And then the Uber that actually drives you there is the solver that makes it happen. I think intents as a general pattern is like a actually fairly simple thing. It's the idea behind it, and this is especially true for cross-chain, is that there is a set of things that are too difficult for users, too complex, they're too expensive for users to have to do themselves. And so instead of having to have the user deal with a lot of the complexity of things like routing and switching chains and like figuring out the best possible path for swapping and things like that, you can instead allow for some service provider to do it on behalf of the user and to take a small fee for doing it.
That's really cool, Arjun. I actually thought about the same Uber explanation a while back, and then it's kind of like you took the words out of my mouth. But that's really cool. And I think for if I were to think about like I think intent-centric protocols, right? In like a very basic way, I think it's all about focusing on like the user intents and having this as a goal and kind of optimizing your product architecture or just whatever to facilitate these specific actions efficiently. So when I think about it with our product here at Kontos, I think, if you're just talking about like the intent-centric architecture, we're all about simplifying complex actions such as like, smart contract execution, asset transfer, stuff like that, that can be, might be fairly straightforward for crypto OGs. But for someone who's getting into Web3 as a newbie, it can be a fairly daunting process. So I think that's also a major part of being intent-centric and just making everything more simple and user-friendly. And hopefully by aligning all of our systems together with this, we're able to kind of like streamline everything. And that also allows us to kind of like, bring in like more transactions and whatnot. So I think the main goal of this is to have users in your kind of like as your target and just build your whole protocols around this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my personal kind of mental model of what's an intent is a bit, it's more blockchain specific. So the way I like to think about it is to start from a transaction, like a blockchain transaction that you can execute. If it is a swap, it would be, how much you want to swap, what's the slippage tolerance, on which AMM, so on and so forth. But really, it can be any transaction, and then remove a part, like a piece of information, a part of this transaction, so that in itself it cannot be executed because its important part is missing. And then you have a mechanism by which you delegate some other party to complete the transaction for you. For the most part, the mechanisms are like, at least in the context of trade intent, are auctions, different type of auction. CowSwap uses batch auctions. Uniswap X or a 1inch fusion is more like a Dutch auction, and we can get into the differences later if it's interesting for you. But the point is that where the protocol comes in is exactly in how the missing bits of the transaction how the transaction that is incomplete gets completed by some other entity. Typically an expert or someone who has some advantage over the regular user. For example, has a more sophisticated routing algorithm, or is better able to kind of deal with threats like a sandwich attacks. And of course, as everything was said before, is also fully correct. The whole point is simplifying the life of the user, who can leave out certain complexity from what they want to do and rely on other parties to actually put in the missing parts.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. And I just want to point out Tharaka mentioned a part of Intents, and I guess Andrea the other. So I think the first main thing that's of importance is efficiency. So this kind of system provides you with more efficiency, and the other is like simplifying or abstracting away any of the complexities for the end user. So, for example, if you want to swap or bridge as a new user, you may not know where the best place to do that is. If you're utilizing a protocol like CowSwap or Connext, it's just going to simply find you the best path and give you the best price. So that part is, I think, for myself, really, really cool. It helps kind of new users and old users or anyone to kind of receive the best rate, the best routing. And I guess you could determine your own intent in the sense that if security is of your highest priority, you can choose bridges that have the kind of the best security, or swapping systems that have the best security or best price, things like that. So I think for myself, at least, we're kind of at the forefront of this idea, and we may see this idea develop as we go. Do you guys agree that we kind of are, I guess, at the forefront of that, and then we will see more intent-centric protocols and more kind of intent structures being developed in the next couple of years here?
So if I may, so I agree with you that in order to make like DeFi, for example, easier to use, or just blockchain in general easier to use, we should have more intent-centric protocols, exactly as a way to remove some of the complexity from interacting with with blockchain. However, I do think that in the discussion about intent, oftentimes we leave out an important aspect, which is exactly the mechanism that will be used to then complete the intent and make it a transaction. And this is an important part because, for example, if the mechanism is an auction, then the auction needs to have a metric to judge, for example, different bids. That then is, and this metric is used to choose a winner that will then complete the transaction. And this is important because certain things are easier to measure, and it's easier to make a number of how good is the proposal. For example, a swap, you can say, I got a better price from this solver, therefore this solver is executing the trade. Other things that are a bit more fuzzy, and I'm not saying that it's not possible, like for example, measuring risk is obviously more complicated. And I hope that a lot of the discussion around intent will shift a bit toward how best to measure certain things for then building a mechanism that try to optimize for these metrics. And certain things are very natural. For example, best prices. We have an extension to intents to AMMs where essentially the idea is that a solver proposes to trade with an AMM, and the scoring rule is by how much you move up the AMM up the curve, where the traditional AMM constant product you stay on the invariant curve is called. There the metric is used is how much you improve on the curve. But in general, like you can think about intent only if you have a good metric for what you're trying to do. And that's not always the case. It's not always easy. And I think in general, we want to look first at applications for which the measurement is easier and then slowly move toward things that are harder to measure.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that makes total sense. And I think that kind of fits into the tech of the solver, or, running it back a bit is what are solvers and how does that fit into the intent structure? So maybe we could discuss a little bit about that idea or the mechanism behind completing, or the best way to measure the intent structure.
Yeah, a solver is basically like any actor that is going and fulfilling an intent on behalf of a user. That's a really, really broad definition. You can have solvers really for anything. So like, as I mentioned earlier, an Uber driver is a solver. Market makers can be solvers. Routing APIs can be solvers. As long as they're like submitting a transaction to chain. I think there's like several challenges associated with solving. So it's like a really big umbrella definition, but then in practice, there's like meaningful differences between the ways that you go about solving for, something like CowSwap versus something like Connext, and coming up with like a unified mechanism for developing and deploying solvers that are like arbitrarily complex or can do any kind of intent is actually quite challenging. So for example, some of the challenges that exist include things like, okay, in CowSwap, you're like optimizing for a very specific kind of game. And that specific game is like cow auctions. And like you are basically trying to consistently win cow auctions within the constraints of CowSwap's application, where as a solver, you don't need to have any funds because effectively you are solving and executing the transaction and getting repaid within the same block. However, in Connext and any other kind of intent-based bridge or any other kind of cross-chain intent in general, the solver is not actually getting repaid immediately. They get repaid later. And so that opens up like a whole other can of worms where like, okay, now solvers need to think about, you mentioned a little bit earlier, like, oh, like you could route to whatever bridge. Well, actually in practice, for cross-domain intent systems, like the solver basically just gives funds on the target chain, and then it's up to them to decide which bridge to use. So it's like they're the ones who have to decide like what security parameters am I comfortable with, what pricing do I want, do I want to even go through a bridge, do I want to use a centralized exchange, do I want to use an OTC desk. But in order to do all of that, the solver needs to kind of figure out, well, how much do I even charge to the user? And that's actually a really interesting and open question, because it's like, well, how can a solver know how much it's going to cost them to go and rebalance their funds in the future? And even beyond that, there's like a whole host of other kind of challenges. Like, you know, you can build solvers for systems like Cow and Connext where, you know, there's an incentive, right? Like there's explicitly order flow going through the system that is generating lots and lots of value over time. And so there's an incentive for people to go and like build things, or at least like come and like compete in this system. And perhaps even build like a custom implementation for the system. But what happens if you have like, you know, kind of more extraneous like intents that are just like, I want to go and do XYZ things, like a bridge and a swap and a deposit, and then swap on CowSwap and go do something else, right? Like figuring out how to compose all of those things together is actually quite a challenge. You know, you can have like composability between solvers, so you can have like one solver does something and then another solver does something, but then what's happening is you're executing all of this over many different blocks, which is not ideal, right? Because that makes things more expensive. The ideal outcome is that you have one solver that just does everything and then gives you the output, but then that solver has to go and build this like way more complex thing for an intent that maybe only ever shows up once. So how do you justify that? I think that this is like solving is like perhaps one of the most interesting and open kind of problem spaces in the space right now, simply because like in the world that we're describing, where everything, you know, the entirety of this ecosystem can be abstracted away using intents, well, solvers are going to be like one of the largest market categories out there, because it's basically going to be any kind of application needs to have their own unique set of solvers to be able to go and do things.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation, Arjun. I think when it comes to solvers, I mean, just generally, I think, you know, they just ensure that, you know, tasks are executed accurately and securely. And I think with Kontos, the solver kind of role fits into our broker role, right? With the core focus on intent. So in our sense, I think the solver plays like multiple roles. So initially, from analyzing a user's balance to understanding what tokens that they have in their wallet, to kind of understanding the gas fees that they have to pay within like the cross networks that they're going to use, and then executing those payments from chain A to B. So they're able to play multiple roles, and I think from a user's perspective, solvers really do help, you know, find the best solutions for all of their actions. And I think it's important that, you know, that this kind of area is continuously improved on. And I think this is what will really make Kontos, you know, an important tool for the future. And I think it's something that we're still kind of like exploring and learning. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much for those explanations. So I guess the takeaway here is kind of different protocols, different complexities. And, you know, the more complex you may run into a situation where you're, you know, of course, dealing with multiple solvers, or as Arjun mentioned, maybe not necessarily just one block, but multiple blocks in the crypto space. One question comes to mind for me is around like decentralization, obviously another component of not just price or risk, but like is, you know, we're in this space today because people want decentralization. That's kind of the modem of you know, all crypto today. So I think that's important to bring up, is kind of around the risk mitigation, and with solvers, you know, for example, what are the mechanisms in place to ensure that the solver is acting in a way that isn't detrimental to the whole system. So I know some protocols have introduced like slashing. Maybe anyone can touch on kind of the importance of the economic factors around ensuring that you know, there's decentralization, and then there's a mechanism in place to ensure that these actors are acting in a way that's not, you know, hurting the whole system.
Yeah, maybe I can speak for these are all interesting, great questions and difficult questions because there is not an easy answer, and I can explain how we approached it at CowSwap. First of all, CowSwap we are committed to decentralization. That's why we are in this space, and our commitment to this decentralization is, however, second only to our commitment to the safety and security of our users' funds. CowSwap intermediates between 2 to 3 billion USD of volume every month, and so obviously the choice of do we want to jump on the latest thing to be a bit more decentralized, or we want to take it a bit more be a bit more cautious? So we have certain trade-offs in front of us, and based on those trade-offs, we decided for the moment the mechanism itself is run off-chain. So what happened is that there is the on-chain component that provides some minimal guarantees to our traders, in particular that you would never trade at a lower price, so a price worse than the one implied by your slippage tolerance. Okay, so that will never happen because there is the on-chain guarantee. Now the improvement from that comes from the auction that is run off-chain. And then, of course, there is another layer of guarantees, which is if we observe solvers misbehaving, we can slash them. Okay, so it's kind of a combination of off-chain and on-chain component. Now, of course, we'd love in the future to do everything on-chain, including the mechanism, the auction itself. This is an area where there's a lot of development, like a zero knowledge, for example, is one zero knowledge proofs that can be used to run auctions so that you don't observe the bids by everybody when you yourself are bidding. But for the moment, this is the setup that makes us more comfortable, and we think it gives us at least the best trade-off between certain guarantees, hard-coded guarantees that come from the on-chain component, and then the guarantees that we come from our own off-chain component. Okay, now different protocols of different type of intents, perhaps also at a different stage in their life cycle as projects may solve these trade-offs in a different way. But that's how we've done it at CowSwap.
Awesome. I mean, I guess decentralization is a really hard problem. It also means a lot of different things at different parts of the intent stack. So for example, I guess you can kind of think of the flow of an intent goes from user goes and expresses they want to do something. And so this is sort of like a permissioning thing. Usually this is kind of owned by the account layer, the smart account layer. Then after that happens, the intent is auctioned. It's basically broadcasted, and a solver is selected that can go fulfill the intent based on what they're quoting they can do. And then there is the actual solver execution piece, and lastly settlement. At each layer of this intent stack, there are centralization vectors. So for example, at the auction layer, ideally you want to have auctions that are as open as possible, and as just so in that way all of the order flow is going through the same place, and that way you solvers are able to go and get as much order flow as possible. But in practice, this doesn't always make sense. So there's a lot of cases where you don't actually want to have public auctions. For example, because you want to protect against MEV, and having putting trading data into a public place ahead of the actual execution would mean that people can go and front run trades. There's also other kinds of challenges, well, what if you want a very application specific auction mechanism? So there's sort of push and pull there, where there's good reasons to decentralize, and there's a lot of projects like Anoma Suave working on ways to have fully open and decentralized auctions. And then there's also really good reasons to kind of keep at least some parts of it private, because you don't want to reveal information before it's publicly available on chain. I think the same kind of challenges exist at the lower levels as well. For solvers specifically, as I mentioned, solving is a complex thing right now. It requires very specialized knowledge. and also like usually is happening from teams that are like doing this as a business. There's kind of a scale here, right? Like on the one hand, it's like helpful to have people doing that kind of complex work because it means that you can have you can basically like offload complexity from users. But then the flip side of that is also true, where it's like the more complex you make solving, the fewer and fewer people can do it. This is a huge problem for cross-chain solving today, where like if you look at like who are the solvers for like, you know, all of the like intent-based bridges, aside from Connext, for the most part, the solvers are either the core team or like Wintermute or a couple of others. And the main reason for this is just like completely uneconomical for most people to solve at the moment for cross-chain. Largely because it's just it's like a really complex thing, and also you need to have your own inventory, you need to have your own money that you're depositing and deploying in order to actually solve the transactions. How does this get better? So one of the things that we did at Connext, like back in 2021, we kind of realized this issue because we had like a network of solvers that were going and filling transactions, and we saw that like, you know, 80 to 90% of those solvers. So we had about like, I think $40 to $50 million in TVL at the time, and we found that like 80 to 90% of the solvers providing that TVL were just like totally passive. They were not taking an active like role in rebalancing their liquidity and in doing anything that would actually like help optimize the way that their capital was being used. And then the remaining 10%, you know, while they were taking a more active role, in many cases they were just kind of doing that at a loss. So what we realized was that like in order to like truly decentralize, and of course like we had like notional decentralization because there was like, you know, like 30 or so different solvers, but in order to truly decentralize and make it possible for anyone to really like go and be a solver in Connext, what we needed to do was like abstract away as much of the like pain as possible, such that solvers could be more passive. I think that that's like probably one of the biggest focuses, both for us and for a lot of other folks in the space, and that's how we kind of address some of the decentralization concerns. Is like we need to find the right balance between like make it so solving is less complex and more people can do it, versus also make sure that solving is specialized enough that it's useful. I think there's some projects out there, Kalani and Enzo are two that come to mind, that are working on basically what I would call like solving pools, that are kind of trying to encapsulate this concept, where, you know, you as an individual solver can just like piggyback on top of somebody else's work and someone else's solution with your own capital or something like that. That can, you know, that can allow you to participate as a passive user, even if you're not like the super sophisticated person that's going to go and build a new strategy.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that information. Okay, awesome. So that's I guess the gist of solvers and how they fit into this picture, as well as you know, some benefits and some other insights there. And then what kind of the decentralization factor is, and you know, as Arjun mentioned, maybe you don't want to decentralize the whole stack. So there's a lot of complexity there. Jumping back a bit, you know, how can, I guess, regular people get involved? Can anyone run a solver for your platform? I guess we can just start with that.
Yeah, so on CowSwap, I mean, to run a solve, there are many ways to be a solver. Certain solver, currently we have about 21 solvers on CowSwap. And most of them are active in a sense that they win, obviously with some variations. Some are like solvers are better than others. I think this is kind of normal as well. And anyway, but the point is that not all solvers follow the same strategy. So some solvers, for example, they have close relationship with private market makers, and they will primarily be solvers as in do like essentially exploiting this relationship that they have. Some other solvers are just based on clever optimization of so routing to do the best possible prices using publicly available liquidity. One feature of CowSwap is that the auction is not about single trades. We batch trades, and then we allow solvers to bid on the batch. So think about a group of trades. And so other solvers become very good at finding coincidence of ones. So ways to exploit the liquidity already on the batch, perhaps on ring trades, to then give everybody good prices. So in a sense, there are many strategies, and I'm sure people will come up with even other strategies in the future. So first message is that you don't have to do what everybody else is doing. You can find your own ways to being a solver. Of course, all of these strategies require some level of technical sophistication. But you don't have to try to compete in the same way as other people are competing. And then after this is done, there are some basic requirements in order to receive the orders and then communicate essentially with us for the purpose of running the auction. These are all explained in the documentation, which we recently revamped. So and things are quite well explained. And then you will need to get in touch with us. Currently, there are two ways to become a solver. One is to go through a kind of a light KYC, and this way, we can. It's as you're not required, so you will be able to accumulate some of the wins into a pool, but you don't have to put up all that money to start with. The other way is that just to put down a fairly large amount of money that will be slashed if you misbehave. Now, this is an aspect that we are currently working on, and there is, like I think last week we posted a proposal to how to reduce significantly the amount of money that teams need to commit in order to become solvers without going the KYC route. And the goal long term is to move everybody, kind of remove completely the KYC aspect and just let everybody have their own bonding pool. So this is a part that we are currently that is currently evolving and changing, and I think in a few weeks or maximum months will look very different from what it is now. And the goal is exactly to make it more accessible for everybody to become a solver, even without having a lot of capital to start with. Yeah, and the rest is, CowSwap is also specific because we reward solver. The protocol itself pays solvers. So the competition is also fairly simple in a sense that you will, all the calculations are in our documentation, but typically the best strategy you can follow as a solver is simply to reveal to the protocol what is the best price that you can provide to the users, and then rely on the rewards from the protocol to make profit. So that aspect is also kind of simple, at least on CowSwap.
Nice, that's awesome. For Connext, so we're kind of in the process of heading towards like a network upgrade that's coming in the next couple of months. And when that happens, some of this will change a little bit. But in general, like our focus has always been to try to make solving as passive as possible and then also as like open as possible. So we're sort of like more opinionated about the ways in which like funds are settled for solvers. That then guarantees them like better security, but then and also like removes the need for them to have to actively think about like, well, how am I going to price this? And where am I going to get like refunded? Things like that. We're going to loosen some of those restrictions because we're seeing that the market overall is becoming more sophisticated. So like, there's obviously a big difference between like where things were a couple of years ago when like solving was just like a totally new thing and no one really knew how to do it. And there was no other case precedence and nothing else in the market that actually worked that way. Versus now where like more and more people are becoming aware of it and realizing like, oh, we could actually, we can build solvers or we can like work with these protocols and we can come up with like more effective models for how to like do things like pricing. Today, Connext is like anyone can run a Connext router. It's not hard at all. Actually, you just basically turn something on, put money into it, and like leave it alone, and it's totally passive. There's some optimization you can do around like where you put liquidity over time, but that's about it at the moment. There is a whitelist to like have a new solver, like basically new participant in the system, but that whitelist only really exists at the moment to protect solvers from MEV, basically from like front running bots or other things like that in the mempool. So it's more of like a way to like make sure that they're getting more profit rather than a way to like restrict anyone. in the future, as I mentioned, we're kind of loosening some of these restrictions. We'll be making it like totally permissionless, so there won't be like any allow list or anything like that anymore. We've come up with an alternative way to kind of fix like the kind of front running issue. And then in addition to that, we also are like sort of planning to open things up such that we can work with like other alternative solver networks. So the kind of goal is for Connext to head towards becoming like a foundational layer on top of which many different kinds of intent networks can exist. That way, you know, it's not like we have to build this like single verticalized product. And so to that end, I think like that opens the door for things like Connext to work with CowSwap or to work with, you know, just about like any other intent-based system in the space.
Cool. So for Kontos, I would say the role of a solver has been fairly limited, especially in terms of a broker kind of role, because I would say the main purpose is to assist users in performing cross-chain tasks, right? And I think it requires a certain level of liquidity, and the main role is to essentially balance the assets between our Kontos chain and other connected public chains. So as of now, it's been a fairly close kind of deal, and so far we have, I believe, between 5 to 10 brokers. But over the next few months, we're kind of working on opening it up and you know, allowing more kind of brokers and solvers to join in, and those requirements, I believe, will be published in the next few weeks and so on. But yeah, I would say generally, you know, the users who'd like to get into this role would have to have some kind of you know, deep understanding on how this works within the Kontos ecosystem, and would be willing to, you know, provide a certain level of liquidity. But yeah, I think those are the basics, and hopefully within the next few weeks we're able to kind of allow more users to understand how to get in, and we'll be sharing more information along the way. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all for the explanation there. And I think it just speaks volumes as to how early we are in this idea or structure, because, you know, typically when we see things start out, they're more centralized or they have less parties involved. And then as we go, we see either more decentralization or kind of the barriers of entry come down so more people can get involved. So if you are interested in running a solver, you definitely have an option with any intent-centric protocol to get involved. And I think it's really cool, you know, to get involved in this new technology and to participate. One thing I really like, for example, with like proof of work, is anyone can kind of start out and participate in the verification of a network. And I think proof of work is a little bit different because it's almost easier to get involved early on because it's easier to solve the algorithm, and now it's more difficult because, you know, it requires more complex machines. So that's, I guess, one difference. But we'll transition here to the last kind of question or thought. Is this new system kind of breeds a new and more positive sum economic system? So today we see like a lot of MEV attacks and security or efficiency concerns about that. And I think one thing for myself, at least as I understand it, and feel free to correct me, but the idea of solvers and intents is it's very much like a Bitcoin proof of work system where you know, it's more efficient and effective modeling to either provide users with the best price or the best security, and then move these bad actors away from trying to manipulate the market or rebalance the market, however you want to call it, with like sandwich attacks or MEV style actions, and allow them to interact in the market in a way that provides a positive sum economic system. So what do you guys think in terms of this technology with providing that new economic system and more positive sum in the market compared to how MEV is today?
I mean, for in my view, in some sense, a lot of so MEV has a lot to do with competition, same as solver and solver centric and intent-centric protocols. The difference is that with MEV, the competition is about who ranks higher in the block. For example, if I see an arbitrage opportunity, I need to pay to be higher in the block in order that I benefit from it, or same with sandwich attacks. Whereas in, for example, in CowSwap and most intent-centric protocol, you have competition between solvers. So the goal is to organize this competition in a way that in the end, the user benefits, okay? And I think there is no better example of that than Cow AMM. So the new type of AMM that CowSwap launched a couple of months ago. In traditional AMM, liquidity providers lose money to arbitrageurs because whenever the price of the underlying asset change, arbitrageur will rush to the AMM to rebalance it and at a stale price. Essentially, the design of AMM is such that arbitrageur can buy or sell to the AMM at an outdated price, even if also on Binance the prices have changed. Okay, I don't have time to go into the detail of how this works, but anyway, there is leakage of value to arbitrageur. This is called lever, and it's the biggest component of MEV. Now, arbitrageurs compete with each other to extract this profit from liquidity provider. Well, the idea of CowMM is essentially to switch the competition around and make it beneficial to the liquidity provider, where now solvers compete to propose trades to the AMM, and the solver that proposes the best trade, where the metric here is by how much you move the AMM up the curve instead of staying on the same curve. Well, the solver that produces the best trade for the AMM wins the right to trade with the AMM. Okay, so now if this solves one of the biggest problems with AMM design, but also if all AMMs had this or similar mechanism, it will eradicate the vast majority of MEV. Okay, now I don't know, I didn't quite get the connection that you made with the proof of work, but definitely I think the idea of solvers and intents is to so one of the power of this idea is to turn competition from something could be detrimental to users to something that is then beneficial to user.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Like, just expanding on that, like the reason why MEV exists is because Ethereum mempool and I guess most blockchain mempools today are running one very specific kind of auction. And like that is not necessarily like it's a very general auction that is trying to prioritize like transactions within a block and order those transactions within a block, right? If you expand the different ways upon which we can choose what transactions happen where and when, so basically create alternative mechanisms for auctions that are more expressive and expansive, then you segment out use cases better, such that there's not really an opportunity for MEV in the same way anymore. And I like the way that you described it, Andreas. It's like we're basically just redefining the competition. As far as what the long-term view of this goes, it's still quite challenging to tell. For cross-chain particularly, cross-chain MEV is such an extraordinarily large problem that it's like even if you kind of solve for this within a single chain environment using solvers, doing it across chains is still kind of an open question. And like I said earlier, there's this trade-off space that exists between, do we want to have more public auction mechanisms for these cross-chain transactions, or more private ones? And if you have more public ones, then you're kind of stuck in that you may still end up leaking information out to the public that could be used to front-run transactions on another chain, simply because it's just a much more asynchronous environment. So there's more of an opportunity to front-run in the first place. So yeah, I think to an extent we will have to probably bite, this space will have to bite the bullet that some MEV will exist, at least until we get to the point where there's we're doing proof aggregation and there's not really any individual transactions being settled on each chain. And so like a bundle of transactions within a ZKP, you can't that can be like pre-ordered within a private MEV or within a private auction and then like be posted to like the public mempool. And at that point, there's not really any MEV anymore. But that future is still a pretty far way away, unfortunately.
Awesome explanation from Andrea and Arjun. Thank you very much for that. And yeah, just to jump back on the Bitcoin proof of work, it's just about just kind of creating a more efficient economic system. Kind of akin to solvers, right? That's kind of where I drew the parallel, but I guess it could be any proof of stake, proof of work. It doesn't necessarily have to be related to Bitcoin. But yeah, I just want to kind of pass it over to anyone for any kind of conclusion or anything like that. Otherwise, we can kind of wrap the space up here. So feel free to kind of shout out your protocol, your Twitter or anything like that. So I'll just pass it back to you guys, and then we can kind of conclude the discussion here. I think it was really good, really insightful for everyone. Even myself, and I thank everyone for being here today to listen and enjoy, and the guests for taking the time to be here.
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, firstly, thank you to the FuruCombo team for having us on. Thank you to Arjun and Andrea as well for their amazing insights, and for everyone joining in to listen to us. Yeah, so if you do want to learn a little bit more about Kontos, feel free to check out our Twitter or go to Kontos.io and just play around with our protocol, with our wallet, and you'll just see how easy it is and how intent-centric it is with every feature that we have on. So yeah, thank you, and hope everyone has a good day.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that it was a pleasure discussing with all of you. Yeah, you should. I mean, you should follow me on Twitter, but especially I think you should follow CowSwap on Twitter. As you probably understood already, I'm particularly excited about the kind of new thing, which is to using Solver to protect also liquidity provider. CowSwap has been protecting traders using Solver by the mechanism of the Solver competition for many, many years. I recently expanded this to liquidity provider. And this will be one of the main area of development of our protocol in the next month. So I think you guys should stay tuned for more news in this direction. And more generally, I think intent-centric protocol and solvers is a super exciting space. And I'm looking forward to see all these other projects that were discussed today.
Yeah, again, thanks everybody for being here, and thanks FuruCombo for hosting this. From my side, feel free to follow me or the Connext Twitter account, which is actually in this group right now. From our side, we're working, as I kind of briefly mentioned this, we're working towards some like really major updates, specifically focused around like chain abstraction and intents that will be announced over the course of the next pretty soon, within the next month. We're super excited by this because we think it's really going to like change the way that the space thinks about cross-domain intents in particular. And as I mentioned earlier, it like opens the door to Connext working directly with like a bunch of other intent-based protocols, whether they are bridges or dexes or whatever. And I think that both of those market categories are realistically going to converge into one thing over time. And so, yeah, I think if that sounds interesting to you, definitely give us a follow and like keep up to date with what we're doing. I think, and if you are interested in building anything within the intent space or already building within the intent space, we'd definitely love to talk to you because anybody that is doing stuff with intents will become our user.
Awesome. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. And yeah, so FuruRadio is again super excited to be a part of the solver space and getting involved with the protocols. And thanks to all the developers who have taken us this far and continue to build the technology out. Because again, it is going to be something I believe that's going to be a part of the future and continue to see more intent-centric protocols and narratives kind of develop as we go here. So I hope that was exciting to you. I will, of course, post the Twitter space later. We will post it on our YouTube, and we will share it with everyone. So if someone wasn't able to attend the call here, they can still listen in and or find a part of the call they want to review or re-listen to and do that. So again, thank you, Arjun from Connext, Andrea from CowSwap, and Tharaka from Kontos for being here today, and everyone for participating. And we will see you in the future, and have a great day. Cheers.
Amazing. Thanks. Bye all.
Thank you. Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.